What's a good word, everyone? It's your boy DKB here. I just want to say thanks for all the support. The channel's been steadily growing, and the number you see below, you can drop a text, shoot a voicemail, any ideas, topics, collabs, etc. you guys want to see. I'll include them in future videos and live streams, and I'll catch you again. Be easy. What's a good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here, and we're diving into another wide receiver from Steve Smith Sr.'s top 10 wide receiver ranked to the list. And today we have Ole Miss's wide receiver Tre Harris, one of the few true X receivers in this class, and I really walked away impressed just because his touchdown to catch ratio is pretty solid, which indicates him being a big play threat, as evidenced by some of the leaps and bounds of development really that he's seen since he's really started getting opportunities going from Louisiana Tech to Ole Miss. So coming in at 6'2" and 205 pounds as a former two-star recruit, this is a guy that was heavily looked at, of course, which is why he's going kind of that famed JUCO route, looking to get himself together and hopefully get on the radar of some of these big teams, and that's exactly what he did. And for what it's worth, Ole Miss has really turned out a ton of good talent. Obviously, we're familiar with Elijah Moore as one of the more recent ones, but you also have A.J. Brown as another classic example of a guy that's been able to figure it out at the next level. And for those that want that big body guy to pair with Garrett Wilson and not just somebody that's elite no matter who it is, this would be a low-key fan favorite of somebody, especially since he could be available at any point in the second or third round, just depending on how some of these other teams are looking at him. But he's led his team from a receiving standpoint the last 3 years. That dates back to Ole Miss and his final year at Louisiana Tech. Does some of his best work at the first and third levels. So I think about things like some of the hitches, some of the slants, go routes, and posts that he's run where he's either caught something short and was able to break it off long, or he used some of those long strides to just get a pretty big play and break things open for the offense. He's interesting because he's a former quarterback at heart, right? So when you get some of these quarterback convert guys that has the athleticism, or they just grown into a certain physical build that really helps them out, they can understand the game, as you'd imagine, right? With somebody being a quarterback, they understand the game in a different way from somebody that's just naturally played the wide receiver position as a whole, right? I kind of liken this to Aaron Glenn and how he developed himself right on that side of the coaching. But when it comes to Tre Harris, you can kind of see it in how he sets himself up to make sure he has friendly, windows for the quarterback to throw into, even though he's not the most athletically promising player that's going to step out there onto the field. But he really tries to become really kind of a smaller version of a tight end for the quarterback, if you will, when it comes to really just being a safe option for them to go through. And you've seen Jackson Dart really have a ton of trust throws on film when it came to Tre Harris, and kind of the breakout season that Jackson Dart's also been able to enjoy, right? With Harris being a pretty significant part of that as the best wide receiver in that program. One of the best performances against top programs, which I think is always a concern, right? You look at some of these schools and some of these players and you say, all right, well, who do they really have on the schedule? This guy's been able to break out multiple times against teams like LSU, Penn State, went crazy against Mercer. So he's battle tested, right? This is a guy that isn't just living off of one famed game. He was on a tear at one point where he put up, 400 plus yard games back to back. And if it wasn't for some of the injuries, which is really going to be one of the biggest concerns with him, you're talking about a guy that many people would probably consider like a low-end round one guy, which he still could be. But knee injuries in 2023, groin injuries / some hip stuff in 2024 really set him back. But he still was able to go and put up 60 catches, 1,030 yards, 7 touchdowns in one of his best seasons, right? And even with the downtick in 2024, he was still looking to have a career year there where he would have been on par to have, I want to say it was about 70 receptions for 1,500 yards. And I think it was like 10 touchdowns, 15 touchdowns, something crazy. But there's a lot to really like about him as one of the true X's, right? He has long strides, which means he has build-up speed, but once he gets going, he's a guy that can win deep. And as evidenced by some of the slants and things he broke big, if he can find himself attacking the right angles or the proper leverage, shrugs a guy off here or there, you can see him take a couple of those balls to the house as well. He's made improvements against DBs that are pretty handsy, which you always love to see. You don't want a bigger guy that can just kind of be pushed around as a big teddy bear. So that part of his game definitely could still use a little bit more work, but it's a strength to see that he has been able to find a way to get some answers against those type of DBs. He can win downfield based on setting up underneath routes, right? You can look at this as really a vice versa situation. Sometimes he can take the top off of a guy early where he burns them deep, and then those guys think that they're going to win the underneath routes, and he just finds a way to make sure that he's always the first man to be positioned to catch the ball, and you'll have to put up a spectacular feat really to knock it away from him or to try to go for an interception. So I really like that about him. Carries defenders with him, right? I love seeing Denzel Mims drag 3 or 4 guys almost 10, 12 yards on occasion. Tre Harris is going to bring that element back to any offense that he's been with, right? Denzel Mims, Quincy Enunwa, when you looked at them and they had certain opportunities, these guys were almost never going down with just the first person or first body that met them if it wasn't like a defensive lineman. These guys were going to make sure that you went on a little bit of a ride. Good catch radius, has solid enough, good area, short area burst, knows how to square defenders up. He can force guys to miss just based on bad leverage and positioning when they try to make some of these tackles. Best work is seen on a lot of these in-breaking routes, and that's when you do see him attack leverages, is when you do see him attack angles. He doesn't quite have the athleticism to live per se on things like comeback routes and stuff like that right now, but the middle of the field is where he's going to be able to eat and really earn himself a lucrative second contract. And he's a solid effort blocker, which has been a rarity in this draft class so far for a lot of these upper tier wide receivers so far. Anybody that has run blocking to their game that's, just acceptable is going to see a little bit of an uptick in value for a lot of these teams here. Things to be concerned with. He can drift on some of his route breaks, right? You'll hear for some, actually a handful of these guys where you'll hear that they're kind of rounding out their breaks as opposed to going a clean angle, right? So if you want to talk about running straight and then trying to break a clean 45 or 90 degrees, these guys are kind of doing this, right? So you never love to see that. It gives DBs a chance to kind of go in recover mode. If you are still winning the route, it gives them an opportunity to still try to challenge the ball, and oftentimes can affect quarterback placement a little bit. Delays in catching is kind of weird with him, right? There's a significant enough drop concern with him, 7.7% drop rate over the last 2 years with the Rebels, but it's kind of like he never really positions his hands at exactly the right time. It's just a second or two off, and then you see some of those balls get into his body, and that's where you get those things where like stuff is bouncing off forearms or the breastplate, or it's being tipped off the hands, and you give a DB an opportunity to go out there and try to make a play. The best thing you hope for in those situations is definitely a drop. Not the strongest 50-50 winner based on his size profile. I know he's not this Megatron 6'5 plus dude or anything like that, but the moment I see 6'2", there's still a pretty decent size gap between wide receivers and cornerbacks overall, to where once you hit that 6'2 threshold and you're hitting to 10-ish plus pounds, you should be able to kind of have your way on certain routes. But definitely with a lot of 50-50 balls, as long as your QB is generally accurate, there shouldn't be situations where guys can kind of manhandle you, or guys are able to go out there and test the vice grips, if you will, right? If that ball touches the gloves, you should be coming down with it as one of the big boys, right? Especially at the X position. He could use some work with hand usage coming off the line of scrimmage. You can see DBs kind of stay engaged with him a little longer. Some of that is because he doesn't really have explosion or burst in his game to a certain degree. Again, he's a bit of a long strider there. But some of that is also the fact that he's just not powering through and utilizing technique in some of these cases to shrug these guys off. Also, you're going to have some concerns about, with that same lack of explosion of burst, his ability to stack DBs early on some of these vertical routes. Some of these he's getting lucky because coverage is drifting or safeties are lacking the eye discipline, or the rare occasion where he does just get one-on-one coverage and wins. But more often than not, that's not going to be as easy for him in the NFL. So it's something he's going to have to find an answer to. But based on how he's found answers to some other issues, I think he'll be all right. A minimal route tree. I know we talked about him having success on in-breaking routes and some of the big plays for him, like hitches, slants, go routes, and post. But realistically, he's kind of been limited a ton to curls, shallow crossers, any kind of in breakers, and then screens. So it's not a robust route tree for him. We don't really know if he can pull it off or not, but something to be aware of, right? Is same struggles that anybody coming out of Ole Miss is realistically going to deal with. So again, for that top tier, not comparison, but seeing AJ Brown be able to go out there and do big things. If you feel the same for Tre Harris, then not that big of a concern. Comp-wise, he's interesting, right? He does have some repetitive releases, but if you take away some of the issues at the line of scrimmage for him, again, comparison-wise, Alec Pierce, Michael Thomas, and Xavier Hutchinson is kind of the elevation and talent levels that I would say you could expect from somebody like Tre Harris here, especially based on style of play. So he's an intriguing guy. I would definitely say, as much as I would love to see two Garrett Wilsons potentially on this same offense, there's going to be a significant amount of us running the ball. I talked about if tight end is a more valuable position within this new look offense than maybe a wide receiver is. It would be valuable to have somebody like Tre Harris, who's been able to capitalize on big plays in red zone and touchdowns more often than some of these other wide receivers in this class. And he also brings a run blocking element that's been a little bit hard to find here. I would prefer to have a big X, honestly, at this point in time. Make sure you can vary up things that when you do come across some of these defenses that just seem to have most of the answers right, you can find a way to throw a curveball at them and force them to have to adjust and find a new solution while hopefully opening up some gaps back in the original game plan for attacking some of these guys, right? So, Tre Harris, definitely an underrated favorite of mine. I don't know quite where I would put him personally yet, but I think if he's sitting there in the third, I don't know how you don't take him just based on how the board fell. But let me know what you guys think. Tre Harris, how do you guys feel about him? Is he an underrated gem? Are people undervaluing him? Is he going potentially in the second or third exactly where he should be going? And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.